Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see some friendly, familiar faces here and some new people, which is great to see some new people here as well. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on this Friday afternoon. For those new people who are joining maybe for the first time, I'm Gray Cause. I'm a fitness coach, a health and fitness coach. I work with runners, I teach Qigong, and I work on the Oxygen Advantage breathwork technique as well. I started these Lunch and Learns about a year ago because throughout my training, throughout my teaching, I met some fantastic coaches, and I just wanted to bring their experience and their teaching skills and share it with as many people as possible. So that's the idea behind these sessions. Today is going to be no exception, I'm sure about that. I'm joined by Tom Herron. Tom is a fellow Master Oxygen Advantage instructor, and Tom and I did the first ever Oxygen Advantage instructor training back in 2016 with Patrick McEwen. So we worked together then, and I know he has a fantastic story, and I conned him into doing this session because he joined my men's health session, which I did a few weeks back, and had some great insight and some great input into that session. So on the spot, I said, Tom, you've got to come and do a Lunch and Learn. So I dragged him over here, and he very, very, very kindly agreed to do it because he's got some fantastic information and insight to share with you. He is a psychotherapist, as I say, he's an Oxygen Advantage coach as well, a Buteyko breath worker. And what I like about his work is he has this sort of like multifaceted approach to working with clients, dealing with trauma, and dealing with events like that. It's going to be very much conversation. So I ask you to join in. You can put your comments and questions in the chat on here if you like, or we're not a huge group at the minute. So if you want to, you can use that little icon at the bottom of Zoom and you can put your hand up, and then we can see if you wanted to ask a question. So I'm sure Tom will be happy with that. So without further ado, Tom, thank you very much for joining the session. Welcome. I know you've got a fantastic story, how you are doing to where you're at now in terms of what you're teaching and how you're working. So perhaps that would be a nice little introduction for everyone. Tom.
Sure. Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you for the opportunity to get my message across, because I think it's useful. Tom Herron is my name, and I trained as a psychotherapist. Now, I wasn't always in this field. I was from about 18 years old in the bookmaking and pub business. So that's where I started, and that's where I got lots of my education, was in the bookmakers and pubs. It was interesting, but somewhere along the line, I developed a great taste for alcohol, and I was curious of why I found it very difficult to stay sober. I found it very difficult to stop. To stop wasn't really an issue. Staying stop was a big issue. So that was one of the reasons why I decided to look up at it. And I was hospitalized for alcohol for the first time in 1976. So that's quite a while ago. And I certainly didn't think I had a problem with alcohol. I thought I just drank too much on that occasion. So I continued on for quite a while. And eventually, I didn't actually know what was wrong with me. My lifestyle was good, as I thought. I thought anybody that didn't drink was a bit odd. And anybody that didn't enjoy high octane sports was definitely odd. You know, so I loved the buzz of the bookmaking. I loved the buzz of the sport, the bet, the gamble, the whole thing that went with it. And the business expanded and eventually went into amusement arcades and stuff like that. But there was something just not right. There was something didn't sit well with me. And then there was an incident happened going to the Curragh, which is a famous race course in Ireland. One of my colleagues, a bookmaker, he was shot dead going to the Curragh in a robbery, and it was he used to drive one day and I'd drive the next. But he was alone this day, which was very strange. And that was about 1990. And I decided to look at my life then and say, like, nothing's worth that. So I started to look and see there's got to be better ways. I couldn't think of another way of making a living that would match what I was doing. So I had to be careful. I was married with 3 children at the time. And but I did. I just quit. And any funds that I had after selling up, I didn't do anything, only find out ways and means of what was wrong with me at the time. And so I went on a very scenic journey and decided that the only thing that made sense to me was hypnosis at the time, because it made a lot of sense that people could change their state. And then I did a course on trauma counseling, and this guy really opened my eyes, and it changed my whole attitude towards me. I then realized that the bookmaking business, someone had to lose in order for me to make a living. So it was completely against my values. So I was working against my values all the time, and that certainly didn't help my love of binge drinking. So eventually I studying trauma, I realized that, you know, there's a link between the addiction and the trauma, and explored that and found that the addiction made me feel helpless, made me feel alone. And so that helplessness made me yield to addiction. And there's several different addictions to different things. Alcohol was probably the worst, but I would get, you know, I would go on binges of different things, like collecting things, or binges of like social media binges or anything like that. That I could do that. I could go on binges of Netflix, for example. And I'm sure we're all pretty well versed in that over lockdown. But it fascinated me how trauma was involved in the whole thing. So today I'm going to show you how trauma affects each and every one of our lives, and we may not appreciate that. Stopping anything or changing things when we understand a wee bit more of how it works can sometimes be easier. Now, knowledge in itself won't stop things, but we can have a shift of thinking, we can have a shift of belief systems, and it's amazing what that can do. It can move mountains. So the trauma that we're talking about is like post-trauma, you know, after the event. Now, what were the events that sort of kick-started me? Well, it's hard to know sometimes what events kick-started you. I know my father died when I was 9, and I got angry at him for dying on me. And like, dads don't die on their sons, but he did. So I got angry with him and then felt seriously guilty and shamed because of that. So then there was a series of bullying at school and stuff like that. So all of those wee incidents were traumatic to me. Now, they may not have been seemingly groundbreaking trauma to someone else, but to me, they were really awful. And I was taken away and sent to school away from the family of origin at the age of 11. It wasn't a boarding school. I stayed with an aunt, or she certainly was a remote aunt that, God love her, she did her best with me, but it was away from home, and it was traumatic for me as well. But today, I'm going to show you how my story fits into how trauma affects us. And you'll see at the bottom of the invitation that you got that there was a link to a little book called The Sky Before the Storm. Now, that made all the sense in the world to me, because it sort of explained to me what it was all about and how we could do something about these incidences, or the response to these incidents that happened in our lives. Because I found out that the incident wasn't actually the issue. It was most usually the absence of soothing because of the incident. So the absence of soothing was often worse than the actual trauma. And you'll see how that can fit in with all of your life. So we'll just go to basics and look at the word post. So we're talking about post-traumatic stress. Post means after, and trauma means a shock. So it's the aftershock. Now, stress can be identified as several things, but here's the ones that we're sticking with for this particular situation or application. And stress is the response of your body to any demands made upon it. So any demands made on the body is a stress, can be seen as a stress. And it can be also defined as your inner response to pressure coming from the outside. And it's the anger that appears in your body when faced with a threat. Now we need ways, an inner energy to deal with a threat. And we can look at anger as being that energy to do that. So post-trauma is therefore defined as the stress that appears in the body after that shock or after a shock. And the stress that appears after the bonds which attach you to others are cut, but not by you. So we can look at trauma being when the world as we know it has been changed without our consent. So if your best friend does something that lets you down, you can't get that best friend in the same position that you had him before that event took place. So the world has changed in that sense. Now that mightn't be traumatic for anybody else, but it can be very traumatic for you. And you can suffer from the trauma and respond to that trauma accordingly. So post-traumatic stress disorder, after severe shock, you're said to be in a very stressed condition. And we can appreciate why that would be. So PTSD is the stressful way you are after a severe shock, and the stressful condition you are in after a severe shock. Now, this condition is viewed as normal. It normally can be expected to appear in anyone who's been exposed to something that's not normal. It may be normal, but it's also a medical condition. Only a doctor can tell you if you have this condition or not. However, it's not a mental illness. It's important to know this. Now, any questions you have regarding any of these, feel free to ask, because some of the things that you hear today are probably different from things that you have fixed in your head about what trauma is. Now, given that trauma involves the cutting of bonds, it can be useful to take a closer look at this. So bonds, in the womb, a baby is attached to the mother by an umbilical cord. And after birth, each of us become attached to others by bonds. We become attached to our families by blood bonds. Outside of the family, we become attached to others by social bonds. By being connected to others, we are safer as a group because the group has more power than the individual. Now, you can imagine the disconnection that has been through COVID recently and how that disconnection has been traumatic for each and every one of us because it was a serious disconnect, social disconnect, maybe a familial disconnect. Who knows? But there was a disconnect there. So bonds which attach create safety. It's important to keep this in mind, since most of us associate attachment with love rather than with security. There's a big security in feeling safe, and we need to feel safe. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Now, the breaking of attachment bonds, anytime the visible bond links you to a home, family, country, society, anytime that's cut, you're said to be shocked or traumatized. The degree of shock differs from person to person, and much will depend on the degree of attachment. The greater the attachment, the greater the shock. The age of the person, the younger the person, the more severe the shock. And the intensity of the event, the greater the trauma is. If you are physically closer to the event. So the proximity to the event is instrumental in how great the trauma is. Also, how emotionally close you are to the person that seemingly caused the trauma. Like, it's, you can get over being attacked by a stranger quicker than you could be by a friend, that sort of thing. And the result is that you no longer feel safe in the world. So if you don't feel safe, and nobody feels safe when they're alone and helpless, and we tend to feel alone and helpless when we are, something happens, something traumatic happens to us. And this being alone and helpless leads to terror. Now, terror, if you look at fear, it's your body's response to danger. And the greater the danger is, the greater the fear. However, when that danger swamps you, totally overwhelms you, that fear takes an extreme form known as terror. We've all heard of terrorists. Coming from Northern Ireland now, it's a word that has been used many times. And extreme fear has a strange feature. Once exposed to it, your body never forgets it. You may forget what the danger was, but your body will never forget the terror. And furthermore, the fear response now begins to run your life. The point to remember here is that the traumatized body lives in a constant state of terror. This is true whether you know it or not. It's true whether you feel the terror or not. And living with terror, you're ruled by fear. Most traumatized people get used to the state of terror that they rarely even notice it. Too often they say, I'm fine, though some may admit to having attacks of panic from time to time. We're also vulnerable to triggers. We may think that they're calm, but if something appears to remind them of the original danger, then their entire body may register terror. These outside signals are known as triggers. They can be anything. Examples may be a person. You might see someone that just brings the whole thing back to you, a color, a sound, a smell, or an object, or any other thing that happens to bring that to mind. And the triggers can appear at any time, but most often when you run into something new. So there's a change of something, your first holiday overseas, or your first new boyfriend or girlfriend. They can appear at important moments such as anniversaries, marriages, retirements. Such times you may have a panic attack and not know why. And the result is that your traumatized body becomes like a country on continual war footing. It's always waiting for the next attack. It's always on guard. You're on sentry duty. You can't settle, you can't sleep. Your breathing is all over the place. And in other words, survival becomes more important than living. And sometimes you can, you'll notice that in yourself if this happens to be something that you have experienced. And anger is the energy behind the survival instinct. It's the energy you use to protect yourself, and it's the energy that you use to assert yourself. Anger is an energy or power. It's not a feeling. You can, of course, feel angry, but anger is always in your body, whether you feel it or not. Like blood pressure, it merely rises and falls. Now, danger or fear raises the level of anger in your system. And since the traumatized body is like a country on a war footing, it follows that the raised levels of anger gives you the energy to attack the source of danger, to fight, or to retreat from the source of danger. Flight. So you've got the fight or flight response. And you can see the freeze response where you don't know which to do. You just freeze because you've got equal energy going both ways. So it freezes you. This is what happens in normal situation. The traumatized body, however, is different from the normal body. Instead of either attacking or retreating, it tries to do both at the same time. You go in two different directions at the same time, amounting to swinging between two extremes. You swing between two poles. We call it the pendulum effect. For example, 1 minute you may be full of anger, then swing over to being full of terror, then swing back to anger again. Other examples, you may want to be in total control, and the next moment you'll feel totally helpless. Or you'll hope for too much and then hope for too little. You'll want all, and then you'll want nothing. The to and fro movement is entirely instinctive. It's a survival tactic. And to understand trauma, you have to grasp this swinging movement. Like the sentry, we can't lose our eyes. So you can see how lack of sleep and all of that stuff can be an issue. Now, being alone and helpless, when you start swinging between terror and anger, you're said to be unsettled. And what makes you feel unsettled is knowing that the world is not as safe as you once thought it was. You just feel unsafe. Think of a baby who's lost his mother. He doesn't feel safe because he's alone and helpless. Because he's alone, he feels angry. And because he's helpless, he feels terrified. Your body's going to feel the same way after a severe attack or a severe shock. And in later life, whenever you feel both alone and helpless, you'll feel unsafe and unsettled once more. So it's important to take care of yourself. And you're liable to feel unsettled when you're by yourself, alone, with nothing to do, helpless. This often happens at the weekends, holiday times, when you come to retirement. At such times you may feel a bit low, but it can be comforting to know that you can do something about it. And to become more settled, you've got to feel safe once again. So how do you allow yourself to feel safe? And anything you do to make yourself feel really safe is to be welcomed. The best way to feel safe is to join a group, to avoid being alone, to help others, to avoid feeling helpless. And, for example, just call a friend or get involved with a club or something like that to avoid being on your own. Do some work, even voluntary work, to avoid feeling helpless. When you help someone else, you don't feel helpless. And once you start connecting with people this way, you'll feel better, and you'll feel better about yourself. Because trauma arises when the bonds that attach are cut without your permission. So those bonds are cut. The world has changed without your consent. Traumatic. And it follows that when you reconnect with others, you'll be dealing with the trauma. And after a severe shock, it becomes important to soothe and protect yourself. The reason for this is that without soothing, you will cling and depend on others for it. And without protection, you'll feel terror. So after a shock, your nerves are all on edge. Your nerves seem all frayed and need to be soothed. And that's why counsellors are brought in immediately after a shock. It's to soothe. After 9/11, they brought counsellors in to soothe. Only much later do you go to them for counselling. Their initial job is to soothe. Then you can learn to soothe yourself. So important is soothing that its absence can be more harmful than the trauma itself. So, but instead of soothing, or as a way of soothing, people often start scolding themselves after a shock. I should have done this, or I should have done that. This never helps. Others turn to tobacco, alcohol, chocolate, sex, shopping, social media to soothe their nerves. These don't help either. You only get real soothing from a person, not from things. So how to soothe yourself? Talk to a trauma counsellor. Listen to soft music, but play it over and over. the consistency will soothe as much as the music. I find relaxation things very useful. I find grounding, walking on my bare feet on the grass, on the concrete, on paving, very soothing. I find reducing breathing, very soothing. Now, sometimes you have to be shown how to do these things. We can read it in a book. Some people can work it off a video, but other people need coached. I was one of the people that need coached. And all of these things can be very soothing. And we can look at beautiful scenes, look at nature, create beautiful things. Beauty soothes. Nature soothes. And avoid horror movies. Avoid horror scenes. If someone wants to show you something on Facebook or social media that's horrible, ask them, do I need that image in my head? Because your body doesn't need any more ugly images. So be careful, look after yourself. You don't need these things in your head. You're traumatized enough as it is. And people tend to like to shock you with, look at this type of thing. And it's shocking. But stay away from them because they're not really useful. And when you've had a serious shock, you can realize that you're helpless to do anything about it. It's outside of your control. So when we are out of control, we don't feel safe. So complete helplessness due to loss of control creates a terror that your body will never forget. Indeed, the lack of control may also be more traumatic than the shock itself. And that learned helplessness, and there's quite a bit of literature on learned helplessness, and it's useful to look at that and see what it's about. But it's the helplessness that you feel when you're shocked, and it's due to the loss of control over things that overwhelm you or swamp you. And when you're swamped, you're taken by storm. It's like being on a ship in the middle of a hurricane. It's like looking at death. And in this, it differs from ordinary hopelessness. This is what the sailor might feel when trying to sail against a strong wind. That's ordinary helplessness. And he's slowed down by the helpless. He's slowed down and is helpless to do much about it. This is natural helplessness. But if you're swamped or overpowered, you can feel a total helplessness that's learned. So we call this learned helplessness because we just haven't a clue what to do. And that replaces mastery. So we learn, we get good at doing something, we master something, and helplessness replaces mastery. It'll make you yield to addiction, and it'll leave you unable to make a decision. It'll stay with you forever unless you do something about it. And you have to protect yourself from this dangerous helplessness, as well as from the outside world. Both will swamp you if you allow it to happen. Now, how does it affect your body? Well, traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder is a medical condition. It is a medical condition because of the unusually high levels of chemicals that appear in your blood after a severe shock. It's normal for your body to produce more chemicals when you're under pressure. The extra chemicals in your blood give you instant energy to deal with the pressure. Then when the pressure eases, the chemical supply goes back to normal. I'm sure we all can identify with that. However, when you get a severe shock, your body seems to have trouble knowing when the shock is over. And as I said earlier, once the body experiences terror, it never forgets it. As a result, the chemical supply does not go back to normal. Your body remains filled with those extra chemicals. That is why the traumatized body is said to be different from the ordinary body. So once I get used to the adrenaline rushes of gambling, for example, how do we replace that? If we get a rush of a near-death situation, how do we replace that? Because it's such a rush that some of us want to recreate that because it's a rush. It's a huge rush. Probably why people jump out of perfectly good planes, that rush. Anyway, the traumatized body is different from the ordinary body. And just remember that traumatized people have an unusually high level of chemicals in their blood supply. And so what do we do? Well, go to your doctor for help to get your blood back to normal. The doctor may say you're fine. On the other hand, your doctor may treat you or send you to a psychiatrist. Now, that's the medical model, and it's there, it's available, so it's better than nothing. And psychiatry now has taken many different turns. It uses usually three ways to treat things. It uses drug therapy, it uses CBT, and it uses a thing called EMDR. And EMDR is eye movement desensitization, reprocessing. And you can look that up in your own time. It can be really powerful. And I've used it, I've trained in it, and it can be really powerful for treating trauma. Now, as we know, only a medical person can tell you if you've got post-trauma stress disorder. So go to your doctor and see what he says. Now, we've got different views of drugs and doctors and all sorts of things like that. But explain what's going on with him and see what he does about it, and then make your mind up what you're going to do about it. On the other hand, anyone that tells you to pull yourself together, there's nothing wrong with you. Put it behind you and get on with your life. Don't think they're helping too much either. So after you've seen your doctor, go to a trauma counsellor or group for further assistance if you want it. Remember, groups are really useful. And make sure that it's somebody that's used to dealing with trauma, because there's lots of people not. And after you've been to see the doctor or the trauma counsellor, explore what they're all about. And remember that having so many chemicals in your blood does many things. For example, it keeps you that feeling of terror keeps you alert. Remember we spoke about the sentry, and looking at the state of alertness, this state is closely linked to terror. And since your body never forgets the feeling of terror, it follows that you'll find yourself staying alert in case the terror comes back. You'll be on your guard, like a soldier on guard duty. And you might find yourself checking things, counting things, just to see if you're safe. And one of the things that I find useful is if you're feeling that way, check the things, but move your eyes, not your head. Instead of looking around to familiarize yourself with the place, just move your eyes and say, there's a door, and the door, and there's a window, and familiarize yourself with the surroundings without moving your head. If you move your head, you get anxious. You move your eyes, it will calm you. So even something as simple as that, doing breath holds, really useful to calm you. Small breath in through the nose, out through the nose, hold your breath for a count of 5. Then recover, do it again. And it'll bring you into the breath and it will calm. It'll calm you. And once you get used to doing this, humming is really useful as well. Breathe in through the nose and hum. And realize that when you hum, your out breath is always much longer than your in breath. So you'll find that when we breathe in, when we inhale, we trigger the fight or flight response, and we trigger the rest and digest response on the out breath. It activates it. So the longer that the out breath is, the calmer we tend to be. So we hear about, 4 breaths in and 6 breaths out. But if you're humming something, you'll find that your breath in is very short and your out breath is very long. That can be very calming. Like if you've got someone that you're wanting to soothe, I get them to walk on the grass and breathe in and hum. I don't even explain to them what it's about. I just say, follow me. So I'll tell them what to do, and then we'll do it together. And we could do that for 20 minutes, half an hour, depending on what state the person is in. Because if the person is so traumatized or so anxious, there's no real point in talking to them anyway. So get them calmed initially, and then see what happens. And because people are so much more anxious than they admit that they are. And you'll find that things like mindfulness seem too difficult for them. They can't settle. They just can't settle. So when you're walking and humming and you're grounding yourself on the grass, for example, you're taking action. So that in itself is a calming effect. You're exercising, which is a calming effect as well. And the humming is stimulating the vagus nerve. The grounding is stimulating the vagus nerve. The reduced breathing is stimulating the vagus nerve. And all of those vagal tone exercises are just have the effect of calming you. It will reduce your heart rate and it will calm you. You'll not know what's happening, but you'll feel different. Now, what I do is I measure it. So we have a thing called SUDS scales, which are subjective units of distress. And SUDS scales are on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is perfectly comfortable and 10 is driving you up the walls. How anxious are you now? So they'll say, right, I'm a 9 or I'm in 7, and then do some of the exercise and then ask them again. And you'll see it coming down. And it's good to know, good for them to see a measurement. And it's, if you're doing something like confidence building, do it have the scale from 1 to 100. So basically, they're starting off with, if it's something positive, have longer scales. If it's something negative, have shorter scales. So it's interesting just by doing that, how it can calm people and calm the person you're with. Even the tone of voice, how you speak to someone, will dictate an awful lot of how calming you'll be. Because they must feel safe. And we have to create that safe space for them. And creating the safe space allows everything else to follow. So remember that the first thing we must do is make sure that we create a safe space. And if someone is angry with you, for example, and you're anxious because they're angry with you, and they give out to you and they start to name call and do all sorts of things, remember that trauma makes us childlike. So we'll go back to childlike behavior. It's not childish behavior, it's childlike. And we think of things like, childlike behavior, huffing, somebody going into a huff. Now we know that children huff. And why are you talking to her after what she did to me? And you say, what's going on here? But the child can't understand that, she's not my friend, so nobody should be her friend or whatever. So we may know adults that huff, but it's adults that are traumatized and just being childlike. We may know adults that name call, but it's them being childlike because of they're feeling that anxiety and that terror. Or we may feel, we can see children bullying each other in the playground. But we also know adults that may bully. Again, it's something that they've learned. And so make sure that we be the adult, not childlike, and see the difference just that change of perspective and that change of thinking can do. Now, we have to be in a safe place to do that. And if somebody gives out to me or rears up on me or insults me, I'm quite liable to feel compassion to that person, because it's just letting me know what state they're in. And they're giving a really good demonstration of someone I don't want to be. So there's lots of positives I can take from that. Or I can devastate myself. And the only reason why it would hurt me in any shape or form is because at some level I believe it's true. So stop believing it's true and allow yourself to realize that they're just giving you loads of information of how bad a state they are in. And we look at it differently then, and we can see past all of the garbage that they're throwing at us. So trauma makes us do risky things. That's why we drink too much or gamble too much or drive cars too fast or take risks with our lives and, eat things that we shouldn't eat and, be overweight or underweight or all of those things. They're risky business. And one of the things that's also very risky is talk. And someone's talking about someone else and gossip. It's risky talk. So that person is only letting you know how traumatized they are. So they're keeping themselves out of or it's an attempt to keep themselves out of the limelight by focusing on someone else. And it's interesting to see how all of those things show us just how traumatized other people are when they're in our presence. And everyday life, we can see it all the time. How people taking risks, how people that are yielding to addiction, and people that are in the middle of helpless and hopeless situations that can be seriously traumatized. Now, trauma can also be transgenerational. It can go from one generation to the other. It can be certainly contagious, because if we stay about loads of traumatic situations and loads of traumatized people for long enough, if we don't look after ourselves, we can suffer from it and not know it. And that's why we change how we feel about people dumping things onto us. And instead of people dumping things onto us, take the view that they're not looking fixed, they're not looking sorted out, they're not looking advice, they're looking to vent. So they're debriefing. So basically, you're just holding space for them. You're not taking it on board. And see how that works, because sometimes that's all they need, And sometimes when you change one part, if someone's been really traumatized and they're seriously under pressure, and like, for example, somebody's worried about their mortgage, but their health's bad, and the wife has left them, and all sorts of things, and they get financial advice on how to sort the mortgage out. Everything changes, So it's so amazing how we're in such a state that something has been brought up on us that leaves us helpless and in a seemingly hopeless position. And then when someone gives us the proper help, everything else can change. So trauma can be transformative as well. It can make seemingly hopeless situations into fabulous situations. So it's something that we have to be aware of and see when it's affecting us. Now, basically, I'm sure there's lots of questions and stuff. I don't know, but there may be lots of questions about some of the things I touched on. And I'm going to give you an opportunity now to ask those questions, because you can see that the whole thing about trauma is vast. And this is like an introduction to what it's about and my view of it. So basically, I'll give you my view and my experience. I've been working over 20 years in the field, and my own experiences and the stuff I do with my clients. It's been transformative, and I have worked with serial reoffenders. I've worked with people in dire straits. I've worked with people in seriously and seemingly hopeless situations as well. And many things have changed. So feel free to ask whatever is useful.
Any questions in the chat box, or if you want to open your mic and speak live, you're quite welcome to do that. I've got loads of questions actually, but I'd be interested to know, Tom, from your point of view, from your experience, what came first for you? So was it the breath work or the psychotherapy, the NLP? How did you get into trauma counselling and working with clients?
I wanted to find out what was wrong with me. So basically, I was only interested in a personal journey to see what was wrong with me. And the first thing I came across was hypnosis. It made a lot of sense to me. It opened the doors into NLP. Then trauma counselling came after that. And trauma counselling really changed my view on things. And because I hadn't thought of trauma being so much part of my life and my experience and my behavior. And then breathwork came after that. And so I look at things from the physical, the emotional, the psychological, and the spiritual side of things. And I find that a spiritual disconnect is very traumatic. So if somebody had issues with their religion, or people in their religion or something like that, they felt the religion let them down, seriously traumatic. You know, and it's getting that that reconnection that can transform things. So the breath work came about 2003, 2004. So and I immediately knew that this was so much part of it, because it's, even from a spiritual point of view, you know, someone from a spiritual point of view, if you believe in a power greater than yourself, like the spirit's there as long as you're living. So you don't have to hook for it or look for it, it's there. Because if you're not breathing, like inspire, to inspires, to be in spirit, to breathe in. So that's where the breath work came from me, and it all fits. I had a lady this morning, and she's suffering from a serious drinking problem that was exacerbated over the COVID period, and she said that the breathing made such a difference to her.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that often breath work is missed in a lot of practices, and I think we know that as we've worked through a lot of the lunch and learns, and the simple stuff can always be most effective. And we got a question from Lanny, who is a facilitator in conscious connected breathing. So she's saying, if you're familiar with that, what would you say is something I should be aware of, in your opinion, when it comes to clients who have experienced severe trauma? So what should she be aware of?
Well, you'll see it in their breathing anyway. Their breathing will be the first thing. One of the biggest changes in the COVID stuff for me was having to make the transition from seeing the person in person to remote, because I couldn't have that walk into the clinic with them to see what their posture was like, to see what their breathing was like, to see how they held themselves, you know, and that's so important. So you'll see someone, their breathing will tell you so much, and see if they're upper chest breathing, because they will be. And you'll be amazed at the difference that just checking their breathing will be. And you'll find that their bolt score, for example, will be very short. Their sleeping probably needs looked at. They're probably either sleeping too little or too much. And when they're waking up tired and they're waking up with a dry mouth, there's lots of things that you can do with that. Get them to close their mouth, tape their mouth, get them to get the sleeping nailed. Because once they get a good night's sleep, everything changes. We feel better about ourselves when we get a good night's sleep. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Hopefully that has answered your questions. Please feel free, anybody else, to chip in, ask questions, pop them in the chat box. I've got a question actually from the point of view of you as a coach. Reading that the book that you sent us, which I thought was fascinating, that PDF, and it says actually if you're working with clients, you can become addicted to trauma yourself. So do you feel that has ever affected you from that point of view, Tom, if you're working a lot with clients who are suffering from trauma?
If anyone's ever going to a counsellor of any shape or form, check to see that the counsellor is in supervision. And if they're not, go to somebody else. And basically, supervision is really important. I have a coach and I've got a supervisor, and they're not luxuries for me. They're necessities. And the supervisor is for me to look after me, because that's the person that I can go to and debrief. Because they'll say to me, because often when I'm in session, I'll say to the client, and I'll be immediate as this. I'll say to them, look, I'm only after taking a pain in my left leg. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but could I be picking up something from you? You know, and they could easily say, I have the same thing, you know. So it's crazy, or a headache, or I just got this strange feeling and my stomach feels a bit funny, you know. So, and then I'll go to my supervisor and I'll explain what happened. There's no names involved, so it's totally anonymous, and we'll talk through that. So make sure that your counsellor is in supervision. And I find that, you know, social workers and people like that are in the nurses, social workers that are, you know, at the cold face, as it were. And they have line management. They've got a sort of a line management structure, but it doesn't work as well as it could do, because the line manager, you go to your line manager and you start to explain something that's bothering you regarding a patient or this, that, the other thing. And then that could affect your promotion, because they could say, gosh, she can't handle that too well. So therefore it could affect her promotion. And the supervision is totally non-judgmental. It's to find out that the therapist is, you know, looking after themselves by allowing them a safe place to debrief. Again, it's safety. Yeah. So anybody who doesn't agree with what I'm saying, it's because you're allowed to do that too.
Another really interesting thing I took from it is that actually often it's the lack of soothing. So the trauma, I was listening to the podcast that you did with Patrick, and about when you're working with clients, you're working now rather than digging in to the past, everything that's been going on, because actually it's about now, and it's about the soothing. It's about getting your clients out of the head in a good way. And that really resonates, is that it's a lack of soothing. Can you explain that maybe a little bit more? We've just got a few minutes left, so please feel free if anybody else has got any questions.
You can imagine, if you can imagine a playground, and you have got the child is in the playground, and the child falls and cuts its knee. That child the whole world has changed for that child. It's squealing the house down, it's hurt. It doesn't know what's wrong with it. So it looks about for someone that it knows. It could be the mother, it could be the teacher, it could be whoever. So it runs to them and soothes that child. And very quickly, once the soothing is done, it may, you know, there may be no reference, or there may be little reference to the actual event, you know, but they just soothe the child and tell it everything's fine. And minutes later, the child's back out. Now, if you can imagine that same child, and it has no one there to soothe it, it has to find ways to soothe itself. So it could easily find ways that are destructive, like hit another child to get it to cry so that he's not crying on his own. Now, it doesn't know, cognitively, it doesn't realize that this is what's going on, but it just did something and, oh, this, so he gets the soothing out of bullying. So then it finds that there's a power thing there and it likes that. So it's amazing what happens. So the absence of soothing can be worse than the actual trauma. And we can get over anything if we've got appropriate soothing.
I think that's a really good point. But it's like when you said earlier on about, like, if you sort your finances out, then you can, it puts life into perspective a little bit more. And I think the important thing is that trauma doesn't have to be a massive big event that happens to you. Like you said, the idea of COVID, there's that heightened stress level that is a trauma to everybody. We're out of control with what's going on in our lives, and that sort of like divided people, whatever side of the divide you're on. But I think that is a really interesting point, is that we're either this type of person or that type of person. The same thing happened, I think, in the UK with the whole Brexit thing. It was that trauma of being out of control, and they actually used the slogan "Take Back Control" to help bring sort of like people together, which didn't quite work. We got some more questions just very quickly. What would you say is, would you say it's necessary to know that's a good point. Would you say it's necessary to know the causes of a specific trauma to heal it, rather than just go into the feeling in the body or releasing that alarm? So you see, you need to know the cause. Sometimes we have no notion of what it is. That doesn't mean to say we can't be soothed. So sometimes as a defense mechanism, it'll shut it out. So it won't allow you to re-experience that actual thing, but the triggers will still work. We mightn't consciously know what the trauma was or what the source of that trauma was, but the triggers will work irrespectively, because if something reminds you of it, you'll respond accordingly. So we don't have to know, no. And would you say it could be quite negative trying to find out, because you could spend your time stressing out about trying to find out what the trauma was in the first place? Well, that's why I moved. I shifted my approach from traditional psychotherapy, which is dredging through the past, because I believe the beauty about the past is it's over. It's over. So let's start now. Because there's nothing I can do about that, but I can from now on. Brilliant, that's excellent. So we've done, that was a really quick hour. Tom, I thank you so much for your input and your information. It was fascinating. Lots of people are commenting on how they enjoyed it. Thank you so much, very informative. I need to return to work now. Paula is saying there. Tom, how could people get in contact with you if they want to find out a little bit more about your work, your clients, what you do? Well, I've got a website, and you can put the website as tomherronexperience.com, and then my email address is peps, PEPSFIT, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually fit. So it's pepsfit at selfcare@gmail.com. So I think Gray's going to put that at the bottom of the screen, and anybody that's feel free to ask me whatever you need to ask. And look, feel free to disagree as well, because I'm learning every day. Yeah, just pop the website address in the chat, and I'll pop the email address and the website address underneath the video when I put the playback up there as well. Tom, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, sharing your stories with us. Everybody, thank you for joining us on this Saturday, on this Friday afternoon. I'm a day ahead. And thanks ever so much. And I will see you all. Tom will see you all hopefully very soon. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.